Good afternoon. I formally declare open this Planning Committee meeting of the Colac Otway Shire Council on the 13th of July 2022. Almighty God, we seek your blessing and guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of the Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. I would like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. Today's Planning Committee meeting is being held by video conference, live streamed and recorded. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The live stream recording of this afternoon's meeting will be placed on the website as soon as practical. I note that all councillors are present, therefore there are no apologies. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No? Okay, I propose that we move to confirm the minutes from the scheduled Planning Committee meeting held on the 8th of June 2022 and the unscheduled Planning Committee meeting held on the 29th of June 2022. Do I have a mover? Councillor Potter, do I have a seconder? Councillor White, is that to be opposed? No, all those in favour? The item's carried 7-0. Okay. Verbal submissions from applicants and objectors who have confirmed in writing that they wish to speak to their submission will be heard prior to the consideration of each agenda item. A limit of 5 minutes will apply to each submitter. Now we move to item 8.1. The purpose of this report is to consider a planning application for the removal of 3 trees at 5 to 7 Skene Street, Birregurra. We have verbal submissions from an objector, Trevor Hodson, and then we will hear a submission from the applicant, Kate Devlin. There'll be 5 minutes per submission. I'll now call on Dr. Trevor Hodson to make his submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mayor. Trevor Hodson, I'm Chairman of the Birregurra Community Group, but this is a personal representation, not on behalf of the community group. Obviously, you have the proposal before you to remove 3 pine trees on the property at 5 to 7 Skene Street. There is observation being made that they are a danger to the public, they're a bushfire risk, and there's an argument that controls for the trees, VPO3, do not apply as they are not listed on the property under the planning scheme, the Colac Otway planning scheme, HO 98. However, it was my belief that they appeared in the Birregurra Church precinct outlined by the Colac Otway Heritage Study, HO 304, and that does have tree controls. There's also some suggestion that a permit is not required because the trees are not native, but Birregurra is very much in favour of the mixture of native and non-native trees that we have at the moment. They contribute importantly to the character of the town. To quote, the architectural and aesthetic importance of exhibiting a richness and diversity of features in the church buildings, especially the spires, towers and exotic plantings. And that citation also talks about all the mature plantings, especially the exotic trees on the golf course. I note that the arborist does not recommend removal of the trees, but rather that judicious pruning should occur. As you'll see from the photographs supplied, there has already been some pruning work undertaken, despite the fact that a condition of the pruning work was to be completed by a qualified arborist. And in light of this, I wonder who has undertaken the work documented in the photographs supplied to the councillors, and why it's been taken before the application has gone to council. I was a little confused when I read the officer's report about the confusion about the actual boundary of HO 304, that is the Birregurra Church precinct. Certainly on the map supplied in the Colac, in the heritage study, and in the description, it is included because it states the precinct includes the red brick former Presbyterian Church, memorials and memorial gates and manse, the red brick Catholic Church and Presbytery, and the Anglican Church, along with the 19th and 20th century vestries, timber halls and churches relocated to the property. And it also incorporates mature planting, especially exotic trees and a golf course. As well as the aesthetic importance of these trees, they are important for the sake of our biodiversity. There will also be a photograph you've seen there of a white-faced heron chick, which was successfully fledged in the trees last year. Birregurra treasures its heritage, both built and natural, and to grant this application would leave a gaping hole in the heritage trail that is one of the many tourist attractions of this town, and a testament to the work of the Birregurra Land Care Group, who worked tirelessly over the last decade to enhance the path. I would urge councillors to reject this application for the removal of these trees, but allow for the judicious pruning suggested in the report to extend their useful life expectancy and reduce any risk to the public to an acceptable level, under the auspices of a properly and suitably trained arborist. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Trevor. Very interesting. I know that you were chair of the Birregurra Community Group. Just remind me, did the community group submit an objection itself?
We didn't make an objection as a group, but I think other members of the community group have made objections. I mean, we had relatively little notice of the advertising because it was really by accident that we discovered the signs on the for the permit application.
Thanks, Trevor. Yes, that's often a problem. To keep the trees will incur cost in the future, not just once-off pruning, but over the next 10, 20 years, perhaps a number of prunings. Do you have any thoughts of how the community could contribute to that cost, or who do you feel should be paying that cost?
Well, the community already contributes to the upkeep of the heritage trail. The Land Care Group is probably each year puts the best part of 300 to 400 hours community work maintaining the trails, doing various improvements to the garden. It's probably worth $100,000 to the council in terms of money they don't spend on their parks and gardens for the work which is done. So I appreciate there will be ongoing costs, but we have trees. I mean, in the Anglican Church we have a cork oak tree which is probably 140 years old, and certainly should be on any significant register. The fact that there's this confusion about the heritage overlay for the precinct now makes that confusing, because that tree under its classification has no heritage protection under the one, if you use just the one for the site of the church, but it does under the HO 304. And I think the council really needs to look at that and consider that quite seriously, because there are many trees which contribute to the appearance and character of Birregurra, and that's been something which has been very strongly conveyed to council over decades about what people in Birregurra value. And to remove those trees will be a devastating thing. It will alter the character of the heritage walk in that park significantly. Who pays for it? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the community would. Well, no, I can't speak on behalf of the community, but I mean, there'll be many people who would be outraged if those trees were cut down, given the fact that there's no necessity to cut them down, and for another 20 or 30 years they will have a useful life.
Thank you, Trevor.
Are there any further questions? No? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Trevor. I'll now call on the applicant, Kate Devlin, to make her submission, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, is that you, Rod?
Yes, sorry. It's
All right.
me speaking on behalf of Kate and I.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Rod.
Thanks for your time this afternoon. As you've probably read in the agenda, our application to remove the 3 large pine trees is based on the opportunity to replant and generate our eastern boundary, remove the risk of falling branches over the public walkway, and mitigate the fire risk to our property and the community. From the agenda to today's meeting, we understand the council has highlighted the aesthetic value of the trees and their contribution to landscape. Our concern with this is that heritage overlays such as the Birregurra Church's precinct overlay attempts to place historical protections over the trees, such as ours, without consideration for regeneration and replacement, therefore placing a finite term on the aesthetic they are protecting. Removal and replanting would provide aesthetic value for the next 50 to 100 years, not the next 10, and would enable the further enhancement of the heritage trail that is currently desolate of any vegetation beneath their canopy. A recommendation against their removal would also place an unreasonable financial cost to us, as their ongoing pruning and maintenance is without question. We have received several quotes from local tree loppers in the range of $8,000 to $10,000 to remove dead wood and overhanging branches. It is difficult for us to substantiate spending that amount of money on trees with a useful life expectancy of only 10 years. We purchased the property with the full intention of contributing to the historical aesthetic of the Church precinct and surrounding township, a property that was otherwise uninhibited for 5 years. We have read and reviewed the alternative amendment as part of the agenda to today's meeting and would be willing to accept these conditions should our permit be approved, and are happy to work with council. We understand the need to protect the aesthetic of the local area, but feel that in this case the protection is very short term, and we would ask the councillors to consider the long-term aesthetic of the area as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Devlin. And if it's okay with you, are you willing to take questions from councillors?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Are there any questions from councillors for Mr. Devlin? Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. Rod, Kate, thank you for your presentation. Your application is really about a renewal of these trees, planting other trees. Can you describe a little bit what the replanting would look like?
Well, our intention would be, for the most part, to replicate a lot of what's been done along the walking trail in terms of ground covers and smaller shrubs, as well as bringing new, what would become more large established trees along that eastern boundary. So I think the council sort of recommendation, if a permit was issued, would be to plant at least 3 trees that would become mature large canopy trees, and we would intend to plant at least 3, I would think, and probably more. Yeah.
Thanks, Rod. And how close do these trees come to your house?
Look, I haven't specifically measured that, but as an estimate, I would think the closest one, which is the 3rd one along, is probably, 20 to 30 metres from the house.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks for your answers there. Thank you.
Are there any further questions from councillors? Okay, no, there's not. Thank you very much, Mr. Devlin, for your presentation, your submission. Okay, do councillors have any questions for officers? No. If there's no questions for officers, councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this matter? Councillor White. You move the recommendation that's up on the screen. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Potter. Is it to be opposed? Councillor Costin. Right, Councillor White as the mover.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to thank the officers for their report, and it gave me a very clear understanding of what's in front of us, and always really difficult decisions when people have a love of their gardens and a love of their landscapes and a love of their trees and want to see a vision for the future, but also want to preserve what we've got. I can really understand how, and thank you to the submitters too, how the local community feel very strongly about this, and over many, many years that community has put a lot of work into preserving and enhancing the landscape in Birregurra, and they very much feel strongly about their trees and the mature trees and want to retain these trees. As the arborist report tells us, these trees are not at the end of life, and with some good investment and maintenance, they've got at least 10, probably 20 years, which is a good time frame, I think, because this is brought to everybody's attention, the importance of planning for the future and ensuring that our communities retain and enhance their environment. So I think that gives a good time frame to do some work around this, and to transition to different plantings and another landscape if that's what needs to happen. The report had some really good photos, and I think it clearly indicates that if these trees were removed, it would have a significant impact on the landscape and the character of the town. These mature trees are so important, and I don't think they're an asset that we really value enough, and whether they're on private or public land, we're seeing them disappear at quite a rate. And there's data that the Victorian government have to tell us that mature trees right across the state and the nation probably are disappearing at such a rate, and the replacement is not catching up. So I think that's another reason why we really have to put some thought and effort into retaining these mature trees. Removal really should be a last resort. The arborist report is clear that with some good attention, these trees have some good years ahead. And like any asset, we have to invest in our assets, we have to spend money on them, and trees are an asset. When we buy a house and a property, they're part of the package, and we have to invest in those as well. Aside from that, they provide, the homes for birds and animals and creatures, and the important shade and shelter along the walkway, and also their contribution to emissions reduction. The removal of trees would not meet the objectives of the vegetation overlay, protection overlay, that was driven by the community, I believe, in 2013. And it's very important, and this is the very reason why I guess that the community wanted that overlay. This community are really proud of their town, and they're very proud of the heritage value, and I think the trees are a very important part of that. And their architectural and aesthetic significance, you only have to drive around the town to get a feel for that. So if these recommendations that the arborists have put forward are implemented, then the trees would, what is termed, be at a very acceptable risk of harm. So just to sum up, I'd like to say that mature trees such as these should be preserved, and as far as possible, I think we need to be part of that, and so I support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Potter as the seconder.
I'll reserve, please, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Costin, you opposed.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just flag that if this motion is lost, I'll move the alternate motion. Thank you. The ageing of these trees throughout Birregurra is a concern. Really, we should have a planned renewal program like we do in the Botanic Gardens. there is not a program to replace trees as they get older and eventually die, and they will eventually die. These trees, these 3 pine trees are over 100 years old at the moment. The Canberra National Arboretum estimates the life of these type of pine trees, these species of pine trees, at about 80 to 90 years. So they're already in the twilight of their life. The arborist says they've got another 10 to 20 years, and sure they will, but it's like us when we get older. We need a bit more love and care and medical attention along the way. And there is a cost to that. Trees don't have Medicare, so someone will have to pay for these trees to be pruned along the way and for them to be assessed by an arborist every couple of years, because that's best practice to make sure that they remain safe for the public. They're preventing any native vegetation from growing around them at the moment. They pose a considerable risk to people walking along the public footpath and picnic benches underneath at the moment, underneath their canopy. They're contributing a bit to soil erosion because they're stopping anything from growing under the trees, and they're on a steep slope. And they're on a steep slope, top of a steep slope, which means they're very prone to a fire risk. And for some reason I can't understand, they're on the boundary of the fire overlay, fire-prone overlay, whatever it's called, right on the boundary. And it just makes sense to me that they should be within that overlay, not on the boundary. If they overhang into the overlay at the moment. So it's a bit, look, at hanging on to these old trees is a bit like hanging on to an old car. I think I used to have an old Jaguar, and I loved that car. I loved it so much I had 2 of them because I needed one for spare parts. And all my friends loved that car as well, but eventually, but they didn't have to pay for it. And eventually the running costs, the safety concerns, and all got too much, and I was forced to buy a new car. And I think it's a bit like that with trees. Do you wait for it to break down? Do you wait for it to fall over? Or do you do a little bit of preventative work and think about getting rid of the car earlier so that you have a reliable vehicle to get from A to B? And the trees are a bit like that too. We need to be planning ahead. And I think, councillors, you also need to think whether you would like these 3 trees, these 3 large 100-year-old trees in your front yard hanging over a nearby footpath and picnic area, and whether you would like to spend $8,000 to $10,000 every couple of years.
Time, councillor.
So for the benefit of others. So really, to me, I understand the heritage value overall, the amenity to the area, but I think we've got to be pragmatic and apply a bit of common sense to this and allow these trees to be removed.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to thank the submitters for making their submission just earlier today. I think the issue here is not just these particular trees in isolation, but how they fit in with the landscape. And the photos in the agenda demonstrate that. There's rightful concern on the gap that will be created if these particular trees are removed rather than pruned. I think Councillor White summed that up very well when she said that removal should be a last resort. Just on the issue of the fire risk, I'm not sure how that plays into these trees, because if the intent is to replace them with other trees, then I wouldn't have thought that would make any difference to the bushfire risk. It would only make a difference if you removed the trees completely and they were not replaced, and that's certainly something I couldn't support, and I don't think the community would support because of the adverse effect on the landscape. So if you accept that the trees, if they are removed, are replaced, then the net result of that is it's not going to make any difference one way or the other to the bushfire risk, which has been raised, because you'll still have trees of salt there. So due to the adverse effect this will have on the landscape, I'll certainly be supporting the resolution that has been moved by Councillor White, which was to refuse the permit.
Councillor, does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Potter, you reserved. Councillor Potter, you reserved.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Look, I'd just like to echo the thanks to the applicant and the objective for their submission. Thank the officers for their balanced report, and echo the words of Councillor White and Councillor Costin. Council spends a lot of money maintaining older trees, but they're trees that are under our control and they're valued by the community. These trees are on private land, privately owned, but their importance to the community is no less than trees in the botanical gardens or anywhere else. Fortunately, these trees are protected under the church overlay, and I think it is important to keep these trees. I was unaware about the heron nesting in the tree and the successful young ones coming along. I think that's another reason why these trees provide value to the community. So I'll be supporting this recommendation.
Councillor White, you had a right of reply.
Thanks, Kate. Just very quickly, just say I think I agree that a plan renewal program is really important, and perhaps this is has brought this to the attention of to the community and to council, and it will give some impetus into giving some thought to that. But as the arborist tells us, there's 10 to 20 years of good life in these trees, and that 10 to 20 years is a good time frame in which to develop a plan and get a good renewal program going for the town. So I would like to support the officer's recommendation.
Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried 6-1. Thank you, councillors. That concludes this planning committee meeting of the Colac Otway Shire. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.